Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the RAP San Francisco Bay Area Chapter's webcast, Driving Innovation Through Changes to FDA Medical Device Regulations. Before we get started, I'd like to say thank you to our chapter sponsors. Thank you to Brandwood Bank Consulting, Network Partners, ReadTech, and R&Q. They help make these events possible. I'd also like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. In the RAPS Learning Portal, attendees will need to enter a completion code to receive credit for today's event. We will show the code on the screen at the conclusion of the webinar, as well as in the chat in the GoTo interface. The code will also be distributed after the program ends in a follow-up email that will come from the GoTo webinar platform within 48 hours of this event. To claim credit, access the webcast in your account in the RAPS Learning Portal and click Enter Your Code to receive credit just above the description. A pop-up box will appear where you can enter the code provided. We've also taken a screenshot of an example of an attendee interface. You should see something like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may submit your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Susan Carino, Chair of the RAP San Francisco Bay Area Chapter. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Danielle. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen, hopefully?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So hello, everyone. My name is Susan Carino, as Danielle mentioned, and I'm the chair of the San Francisco Bay Area RAPS chapter. And we're happy to announce that we're going to be giving away a free ebook at the end of today's webcast to the person who correctly answers the quiz question at the end of this session. So please pay close attention to today's presentation. In addition to today's presentation, we also have, as a San Francisco RAPS chapter, 2 more webcasts coming up in the next couple months. The next one is next Friday on November 13th, where we'll be bringing you a wonderful webcast on human factors. And Jennifer Massioli-Tudor from Outset Medical and Michael Wicklund from Underwriters Laboratory will be presenting on human factors, and we'll be diving into both the US human factors trends and regulations, as well as international trends for human factors, and sharing with you some great insights about how UL has been operating under COVID. The next webcast coming up in January is hosted by 2 colleagues from Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Jonas Wilf and Vijaya Kupa, and they will be speaking on 2 different topics in the pharma space. The first angle will be on managing drug shortages, giving a real-life example of that. And the second is some of the unique CMC challenges to managing biologics. So we look forward to seeing you at several more webcasts in the near future. But today's focus is, of course, driving innovation through changes in medical device regulations. And our speaker, Chris Thierfelder, is a project management consultant with Integrated Project Management Company. Since both Chris and I work for IPM, I want to introduce Integrated Project Management Company so you know a little bit more about us. We are a consulting company with just over 200 employees headquartered in Chicago. Over the past 32 years, IPM has been helping companies transform their complex strategic initiatives and turning them into actionable, successful results for our clients. We specialize in leading teams that to achieve our goals in product development, regulatory submissions, and the commercialization of life sciences products. IPM has 7 locations across the United States. And Chris has been with IPM since 2019 and is based in our LA office. I've been with IPM since 2016 and I'm based in our San Francisco office. And both Chris and I are members of our Quality and Regulatory Center of Excellence. So allow me to tell you a little bit more about Chris before he gets started with today's content. Chris began his career developing medical devices in 1996, and he has worked in a variety of departments in R&D, for companies such as GE Healthcare and Kimberly-Clark, as well as several small startup companies. He holds 25 patents in medical technology and has most recently provided oversight for a $500 million medical tech portfolio that includes wearables, AI-assisted imaging, and digital home healthcare platform. In his spare time, Chris hosts a seasonal business podcast called A Case of the Mondays. And in his free time, he also enjoys baking sourdough bread. So I'll hand it over to you, Chris, to share your insights on the changing medical device regulation landscape.
All right, well, thank you, Susan. I am going to assume everyone can see my screen and I'll just get started. So it's kind of a challenging topic, and so we're not going to get super deep into the weeds. A lot of this is in flux, but I am going to go over some stuff that that you'll at least need to be familiar with, and so I'll hopefully send you off with some things to go look at and make sure that you keep in mind moving forward. So we are going to just briefly touch on what is the 510K. I'm sure everybody understands what the 510K is, but some of you might be new, so I will just take a minute to go through that. Who's impacted by this? Why are we changing it? What are the changes, or what are the proposed changes to the 510K, so the Class 2 regulatory system? When are they coming? Some are already here. They're live. Guidance documents were published for pre-market submissions at the end of last year. Some new guidance documents have been published in the last couple of months, so we'll touch on those as well. Where do we currently stand? And then what's coming after that? And some of this will be a little speculative. I think when this was announced in the first part of 2019, obviously COVID was not part of the landscape, so I do believe that some of the planning that the FDA had done and some of the proposals that they had made for moving through 2020 and beyond were more than likely delayed. But before we do that, I want to get to a caveat. So I am a career R&D person. I have exactly one skill. It is developing medical devices. I have no other skills. And so R&D people, as you probably know, are not the same as regulatory affairs people. In fact, the fact that I'm actually talking to a group of regulatory affairs people makes me extremely nervous, like most medical device engineers, because I know that you know more than I do. Just as a reminder, R&D folks are not known for our strict adherence to rules and regulations. Today is just an overview. It is not absolute gospel. I mean, we'll be talking about a bunch of things that are live, but I would encourage you to go in and get into those guidance documents yourselves. And as always, when you talk to your R&D people, trust what they have to say, but also verify. We're kind of lunatics and not always adhering to the regs, or we try to skate by them as much as we can. Okay, so what is a 510K? And again, I don't want to insult anybody. I'm sure you all know what a 510K is, but just in case some of you have friends on the line that are new, the medical device amendments to the Food and Drug Act were released in 1976, and in those in that MDA, they established 3 categories of devices. The first, Class 1, minimal risk to patient, well-known enabling technology, typically are commoditized. That's a generalized statement, but when you think about it, your Cardinal Healths of the world, your Owens and Minors of the world, they're making millions or tens of millions of these items, per week. That is a commodity class product. It's well known, lots of capital equipment, relatively low risk to the user. Class 2 governs the widest classification of medical devices. So these are moderate risk to patients, and they have a specific predicate that can demonstrate substantial equivalency, right? So a Class 2 product looks and kind of smells like something that's already on the market, that already exists, and smooths out, for lack of a better phrase, the regulatory process to get that product approved. Class 3 are high-risk products that typically have an active component to them. They're like a pacemaker. They use directed energy in a treatment or a diagnostic capacity. So you think like a nuclear resonance imaging or MRI. For implantable devices, oftentimes something like this that's energy-based is considered life-saving, and so those have a very, very high bar. That use the pre-market approval system for getting on the market. And so the 510K section that we're going to talk about today really is talking about the class 2, so that wide array of medical devices that fall within that regulatory scheme. So, when I say wide array, I mean wide array. While class 2 devices only comprise 43% of the U.S. medical device market, they make up about $75 billion in total medical device value for that marketplace. However, they comprise 80% of the current device applications being processed by the FDA. Okay, so think about that. They only comprise 43% of the current medical device market, but they comprise 80% of the device applications. And why is that, right? So why is this important? It's important because class 2 devices occupy the area of fastest growth potential for medical device companies. Oftentimes, new startup companies will begin with a class 2 product to get them on the market. They are less expensive to produce than a class 3 product. Remember, a class 3 would be like your pacemakers, your directed energy products. They require less capital than a class 1 device. So remember, class 1 device might be like PPEs, like we're talking about right now with COVID, or wound care products and so on. Those are enormous capital investments because you need to crank out a lot of those things. A class 2 device has got a relatively small capital footprint, relatively less expensive to put together than a class 3 product, certainly because the lack of a full clinical trial required. But their margins are only slightly lower than class 3 devices. So average gross profit margins are, somewhere in the ballpark of 60%. That's not uncommon for a class 2 device. So companies love class 2 devices, and I'm sure if you kind of look at your own workload or look at your own portfolio, you'll see a lot of potential 510Ks coming down the pike for kind of your planning purposes moving forward. Furthermore, or finally rather, people like class 2 devices because there's a predicate device, and because there's a predicate device for class 2s, you're almost always guaranteed you're going to get paid putting these things on the market. So if something already exists on the market, that's already being reimbursed. There's an existing reimbursement code. It's much easier for you to get on the market, get reimbursed, and start generating revenue for your company. So class 2 devices are extremely important. So just in summary, right? So they have high margins, relatively high margins, right? So you can put revenue on the board. They're fast-ish to market. I added ish because back when I started, 510Ks, I remember setting a land speed record of 14 days for 510K approval. Not really the case anymore, but they're faster than a class 3. They rely on repurposing and modifying existing technology, so your R&D footprint doesn't need to be quite as extensive as in a class 3 situation. Meaning a smaller capital investment, so you don't need to be Johnson & Johnson to get on to start selling your product. They allow for a lower risk market entry for companies, right? So the investment to get a class 2 product on the market is less. And while we don't like to talk about failed projects, certainly we don't like to talk about failed projects at IPM because there's no such thing as a failed project. There's only projects that cause you to learn something. The risk of a class 2 program maybe not going to market, it's less of a bite than say a class 3 or a big capital project. And they have a near guarantee of getting paid for. So once you hit the market with this thing, you are going to be able to generate revenue. And they comprise the backbone of med device firms' revenue growth, right? So that 80% number that the FDA is currently processing of class 2 products, that's an important number to remember because potentially your company, more than likely your company, if you're listening to me right now, has got a number of 510K products that they're trying to push through their system. Furthermore, most companies you go to are going to have a pretty hefty number of 510K products that you're going to need to be managing. So just keep in mind that this is going to be an evergreen set of products for you to understand and be able to shepherd through the process. So what's the impetus for changing it? This sounds great. We're having a good time here in the medical device industry. We're putting out products, patients are getting treated. What's the problem? So class 2 products rely on a system of substantial equivalence for regulatory approval, right? So everyone understands what substantial equivalence means. It means that there's something that's currently on the market that you can call a predicate, right? So that is a pre-existing device that's on the market. You say that your new product is substantially equivalent to that existing product. fundamentally, in sort of layperson's terms, or in dumb engineer guy terms, that means that you're close enough, right? You've got a product. I'll take orthopedics as an example. A lot of 510K products in the orthopedics world. Company A has got a set of bone screws and spine cages and plates. Company B says, well, we can make bone screws and plates and cages as well. But ours are better, but they're close enough to what's on the market so that while ours are better, you don't need to necessarily do a clinical trial to prove that the concepts that we've pulled together are safe and effective, right? So you can kind of go out the door with your own data, your own internally generated data. You can get that out the door, which is great in theory, okay? I just used a really, really simple example, but in practice, it's become problematic over time. So I'm not going to go through this entire slide. You can read this on your own. But remember, we go back to 1976 with the medical device amendments, right? So any device showing substantial equivalency to a device currently, as of 1976, on the market may be approved without additional clinical data, okay? So in the 70s and 80s, that really held fast, right? If you kind of think about just the pace of technological change from the mid 70s through the 80s, an engineer, if you dropped an engineer into a company from an engineer from 1976 into a company in 1989, things will look pretty much the same. I mean, my first job at GE Medical was in 1996, and I was still drawing on vellum. I mean, I was still, pencil, and I had like a tilt board and the whole nine. So, the rate of change of technology, over even 20 years wasn't so much that we really needed to worry about. So this actually worked out pretty well, right? Class 2 devices were substantially equivalent to devices that had been grandfathered in pre-1976. And while there were some changes, there were some improvements in terms of use, in terms of functionality, certainly materials, manners in which we tested these things. You're still in the small change sort of realm, right? The issue starts showing up in the 1990s, and we start daisy chaining by decades changes to medical devices. So maybe a change from the 1990s is small compared to their predecessors from the 1980s, but you're getting a little far away from 1976. Okay, so now you're 2 decades away from the mid 70s, maybe a little more. There are some significant technological changes that are coming through the market at this point that are really impacting this class 2 world. By the time you get to the 2000s and right now, a product going out the market today from any number of well-established medical device modalities looks pretty darn different than a product that got grandfathered in 1976. And so you can kind of understand that while this jump may be small, this jump going back to 76 is not small. And so that's a good reason why we need to kind of take a different look, or why the FDA decided to take a look at 510K changes. Issue 2 is commercial viability and claims. I just, if again, regulatory people, I'm sure you've had this argument with your product managers, with your salespeople. What is a claim, right? So if a company claims something, they need to prove it, typically with clinical data. And so in the class 2 world, you get this dance between what's a claim, what's a marketing claim, what does it mean to be substantially equivalent? If you're substantially equivalent to the thing that you're already being purchased, why should I buy your new thing? Oh, well, it's because ours is red, but also it works better, but also I can't quite, you know what I mean? So you get into this very strange limbo, and the further out you get from 1976, the more you're dancing on that claim conversation. Okay, so again, just for clarity's sake, for our end users to make these decisions, it's an important conversation to have, and that's brought through in the 510K process. And then this other piece is post-market surveillance, which I am going to get into a little bit today in terms of talking about what the FDA has suggested they want to do for post-market surveillance. There have not been the proposed changes to post-market surveillance have not come through yet. I expect those to start showing up in earnest starting next year. But fundamentally, post-market surveillance means what? It means that because it's substantially equivalent to an existing product line, the device leans on the predicate's history of safety and efficacy for itself, right? So it applies that since the predicate device is proven safe and effective, the new device de facto is as well. And then there isn't a formal post-market, rather the FDA is not doing formal post-market surveillance themselves. They're relying on industry to do their own post-market surveillance and then report that. So the industry self-reports and the FDA publishes when it reaches a critical mass. We've all kind of seen seen those databases, and if you're in the industry, you use those databases as competitive intelligence. What are your competitors up to? The FDA has proposed changing this through the 510K updates. So what's the impetus for changing the 510K? It doesn't take long to discover that this class 2 products are great. I have made my living developing mostly class 2 products. I'm sure many of you, this is how you earn your living as well. But we cannot deny that there have been misses, and when we miss in the medical device world, those are not small misses. And so there is good reason for revisiting here in 2020, 2019, 2020, 2021, this wide category of products. Okay. Remember also, 80% of all new products are going to be class 2. So this is the future, right? So this is the future of medical technology. Okay, so what is changing? So this is a word salad. What we're really going to focus on and get into the weeds on is what's in the green box, because these guidance documents, many of them have already been published, and so we can kind of sink our teeth into it. But fundamentally, if you break the proposed class 2 changes down, you're looking at the total product life cycle, okay, of a class 2 device, or of any medical device really, but of a class 2 device, and just providing more clarity to how the entire product life cycle is managed. Okay, so you got pre-market submissions, right? So there are not small changes, frankly, to the pre-market submission process that the FDA has recently published guidance documents on. So multiple pathways for medical device submissions for class 2 products, your special, abbreviated, and traditional 510K. They are planning on, they've not done this yet, but they're planning on creating a public database of all medical devices currently using predicates that are older than 10 years old, right? So this is sort of a buyer beware piece, right? It's so people can go into this database once their physician proposes a treatment, and they can say, wow, you're proposing a treatment that's the technology for which is over 10 years old. That either could mean that it's extremely safe, or that could also mean that it's not using updated technology. So you can begin that conversation. Updated clinical research networks program to create detailed guidelines based on gender and sex differences for medical devices. So right now, there aren't specific guidelines that govern, say, women's health products, that govern, say, different products depending on the sex, gender, or even racial makeup of the patient for those products are being applied to. The hope is that these CRNs will actually build out some of those guidances. And then finally, in pre-market submissions, clarification on just what is a refusal to accept and what that administrative review process is. That guidance document has been published. We'll talk about that. Then moving to post-market surveillance, there are some changes that have been hinted at. There's some in public comment, but fundamentally, post-market, what they're talking about post-market surveillance is really taking a more active role in surveilling post-market or approved products. Okay, so it removes passive industry reporting and goes to active surveillance. They're going to go back and build out those CRNs to evaluate specific high-risk technology. So they are creating categories of high-risk class 2 products. Again, women's health, infusion pumps, signal-based systems, and vascular are the first groups of identified. They're on the higher end of the moderate risk category on an ongoing and independent basis. Again, another publicly available case for quality dashboard for each medical device company that will evaluate companies' adherence to quality standards. So again, if you're a patient and your physician tells you this is the this is the kind of product I want to put into you, you can go in and see who's manufacturing that product and understand what their overall quality standards are, and then update to FDA's rulemaking authority to streamline the process for upgrading product classification. So that's up classification post-market. That's something that was relatively rare. I mean, it was heard of. It never happened to me, So I guess it's like a rumor. It's like the boogeyman in the medical device world. But this is a more formal process for up-classification. I pay very careful attention to these specific high-risk technology categories, or higher risk technology categories. I think we will see up-classification in these categories down the chute. And then finally, these organizational changes, and I'm not really going to dwell on this. I'm just going to make you aware of them. That and candidly, I'll just kind of put my 2 cents in here. I think the organizational changes are actually a pretty good idea. Fundamentally, what the FDA wants to do is they want to change the generic pre and post-market departments in CDRH and turn it into a single organization that is specialized by medical device type, and then focuses on the entire life cycle management of medical devices. So fundamentally, the idea is that you submit to, let's say you're in the urology category. You submit your pre-market submission to the urology category, the urology group. The urology group handles your pre-market submission. They handle your post-market surveillance. They handle your ongoing quality and manufacturing audits going forward, right? So that's a collective knowledge base within that group. And then finally, organizational changes include a creation of a new software as a medical device regulatory system. That is a big project. There's a lot of guidance that's currently being drafted and currently in public review. Don't have quite enough time to get into that full today, but I will touch on it kind of towards the end of the conversation. So let's really focus on pre-market submissions, because that is really where the guidances are today, and that's probably what's really going to be impacting a lot of companies right now. Let's start with the special 510K. So a special 510K governs well-defined modifications for a legally marketed device. And really what we're saying is a legally marketed device that the company in question is already marketing. Okay, so your special 510Ks are for products that you already make. All right. Design control procedures produce reliable results that can form the basis of substantial equivalence, right? You've been building this thing for umpteen years. You've got nailed methods, you got nailed protocol, your acceptance criteria is nailed down, it's previously cleared. The FDA has already said, yep, you're good to go, nail this. And someone comes to you and says, someone in your organization comes to you and says, we need to change the packaging, or we need to change the methods by which we manufacture this product for cost savings, or potentially we're moving our manufacturing facility, or we've determined that we need to put a label on this particular product that guides the patient to interact with it in a certain way. Okay, those are relatively well-defined device modifications that the FDA is now saying you can use this. This is the special 510K. This is for you. This is your universe, right? So your product, your changes to the product, you're not changing any of the methods, protocols, and acceptance criteria to evaluate the safety and efficacy of that product. You can go ahead and file a special 510K for your product. Again, just not to belabor the point, but design changes, labeling changes, indications for use changes, where the method to establish the changes are well established. Okay, so indications for use typically, those are relatively rare, but it's sort of a slight broadening of the indications for use from modifications of, say, you can take your existing product and the meta for the surgical methodology has changed, but your physicians like the product, but they just want to use it in a slightly different way. Again, and maybe a slight design change is required for them to use it in this new way. A special 510K is probably going to be where you're going to land on that. So the bottom line in the special 510K, you're a manufacturer who's making a simple change to your own product that will not substantially change the form, fit, or function of the device, does not need updated user requirements, and will not deviate from the foundational enabling technology in any meaningful way. I said I wasn't going to read slides to you. I apologize, but I just want to put this down. That special 510Ks are for layups, okay? Cost savings improvements, minor material changes, packaging or labeling updates. Basically, if your engineer is falling asleep during their own design review, it's more than likely a special 510K. Okay, those are relatively straightforward, simple changes, and your your engineer, you might need to kick them under the table to get them to stay awake during those design reviews. Let's go to an abbreviated 510K, which I suspect, and we'll talk about too, I suspect you will see more of these. So if you kind of look at the world of 510Ks overall, I think abbreviated 510Ks will actually go up and traditional 510Ks will start to go down. This is my guess, and I'll tell you why in a couple of slides. But fundamentally, FDA review through the abbreviated pathway involves the use of guidance documents, special controls, and our voluntary consensus standards. All right, so let's just break this down for a minute. An abbreviated 510K is for a category of product that is relatively well defined, right? That the FDA's guidance, FDA already has guidance documents, or they're building guidance documents on how to evaluate this particular category of device. So by allowing the FDA staff to rely on manufacturer summary report on the use of FDA guidance documents, special controls, and voluntary consensus standards, FDA review resources can be used in an efficient manner. So these things are supposed to be faster to approve than a traditional 510K. And what makes them faster to approve, pardon me, is that, again, getting back to the orthopedics concept, it's a pretty well-established universe of methodologies, of materials, of processes, of safety and efficacy data, so much so that the FDA themselves have created guidance documents around how to write requirements and actually drive the development of this category of product. If the FDA themselves have created these guidance documents and then you agree to use their guidances and follow their guidance for your own test methodology, for your own acceptance criteria, for your own requirements, that puts you into the abbreviated 510K category. Fundamentally, what you're saying is, FDA, you're telling us how you want us to develop and test out this product. We agree with you. We're lined up. So we're taking your methods and applying those. Here's our results. Okay, so fundamentally, you choose to submit an abbreviated 510K when you rely on one or more FDA guidance documents, like I said, demonstration of compliance with special controls for the device type. Okay, so device-specific classification regulation or special controls guidance documents, those are forthcoming, or voluntary consensus standards. So that is, the industry itself has created a consensus around the standard of requirements, testing, safety and efficacy data to be submitted for this category of product. And just to kind of belabor this, because I do think this was going to comprise a significant number of total 510Ks. I think as time passes, the breakdown is going to favor abbreviated 510Ks. So September 2019, FDA released their first guidance on the proposed safety and performance-based pathways for certain types of medical devices, right? So now here's the FDA actually creating those guidances for you to use in the abbreviated space. So the first batch came out, conventional Foley catheters, cutaneous electrodes for reporting purposes. So your surface-based electrodes for for diagnostics. Orthopedic non-spinal metallic bone screws and washers, already brought those up. And then spinal plating systems, right? So not the cages, but the plates, and then the screw systems that are used to affix. Expect more of these to come. There's an ocean of medical device categories that are pretty well established. I mean, we talk about orthopedics, we talk about catheterization, wound care is more than likely going to come through as well. More, sort of surface-based, non-interventional diagnostic products are probably going to be in this category. What they're not going to be are, if you kind of remember back a couple of slides ago when we talked about high-risk products, you're probably not going to see a lot of abbreviated 510Ks in, say, the infusion pump marketplace, but you're more than likely going to see a lot of these things shooting through, again, the orthopedic market space, possibly, I wouldn't say meshes, but there's a number of, we can talk about meshes. Maybe you can, if you want to talk about meshes, give me a call offline. But anyway, but there is a place for this category of product, more than likely as more categories are released, more guidances are released, more companies are going to be paying attention to this to see, okay, well, how can we get our 510Ks faster? Let's stick to the guidance documents and not try to reinvent the wheel. So again, the bottom line on abbreviated 510K, right? You're a manufacturer who's developed a Me Too product. right? Or a product that will compete in a well-established space against known competitors who are already there, right? So either you're already there or your competitors are already there. You've got, you already have sales call points. Patients are already getting products like these. Surgeons already know how to use products like these. Hospitals already know how to buy products like these, right? The design of your entrant might be innovative, but the specs and the methods on how to get to a final product are well defined and accepted practice by the FDA. So you can, again, when you talk to your engineers, you say, look, this is what innovative thinking in the box is, right? I'm going to give you the box, stay in the box. You can get to the edge of the box, but you have to stay in the box. And that it doesn't preclude innovation in that space. It just means that your innovation has to meet the established acceptance criteria for products in that category. So line extensions for existing product categories, new entrants into an existing and mature product space, clear, obvious predicate devices with an established quality history. All right, that's what gets you into the abbreviated 510K. So, rule of thumb: if your engineer has a desk full of competitor products, or if they're arguing with marketing over why their thing is better than the marketing person thing that's waving in front of them, this is an abbreviated 510K. All right. Anytime you hear an engineer and a marketing person arguing over this is what the competitor has, this is what the customer wants, well, yeah, well, this is what we designed and that's what the requirements say, yeah, you're in the abbreviated 510K space more than likely. Okay, because everybody gets to be right. That's just one of those things. Abbreviated 510Ks, more people are right than not. Finally, we come to the whole enchilada here, and that's the traditional 510K, right? Typical class 2 product category. The specific guidance on what falls in this category is not significantly changed. All right, so you all know what a traditional 510K is. This is the whole Megillah. There has been guidance around how to compile and format a traditional and an abbreviated 510K. So that has been published. The specifics of what goes into it in terms of safety and efficacy acceptance criteria, test methodologies, and so on, that really hasn't changed. The guidance document, which you can see here, is docket number FDA 2019 D4014, really tells you how they want to see that information laid out. Okay, so get into that guidance document. That is actually going to help you ensure that the FDA, picks up your product, and you can have a better chance of avoiding a refusal to accept notification. I will say, however, that the FDA's own statements on Class 2 changes, they have included verbiage on upclassification. If you remember from the couple of slides ago, they have talked specifically about their ability to more aggressively classify products that are already on the market. Well, that also goes to upclassification products during the pre-submission process. Okay, so you could be filing a traditional 510K. Let's say you're filing a traditional 510K into one of those high-risk product categories I mentioned before, say infusion pumps. I have a background in infusion pumps. So infusion pumps, right? Historically, you'd file a 510K on an infusion pump with controls, with boluses, with all kinds of things for chemotherapy or pain management or something like that, and you would follow that 510K process. Now the FDA is going to say, well, either we're going to take your 510K and we're going to add preclinical data requirements to it, or we're just going to upclassify your class 2 product into a class 3, right? So be very aware of that. That is absolutely on the table for the FDA to do and do more frequently. And so again, not to belabor the point, but requirements for preclinical data have increased over the last decade, including in products that are minimally invasive or diagnostic in nature. So even recently, as Susan mentioned, I led an AI-based AI-assisted imaging system program. Historically, a product that would plug into an existing imaging system, which is a class 3, may have been considered a class 2 because it was AI enabled and because it was actually giving new kinds of diagnostic data to the physician. They kept it a traditional 510K, but they required a significant amount of preclinical patient data. So again, this is a big deal. You got to really pay attention. That's where your conversations with the FDA are going to come in handy prior to submission. So again, the bottom line on the traditional 510K, right? the FDA has now given industry 2 other avenues to take from moderate risk products and made the on-ramps to those avenues clearly marked. So if you're not going to take the special or the abbreviated 510K on-ramp, they're going to want to know why, right? They're going to pay very, very careful attention to you. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's it, right? They discussed up classification openly and more aggressively than they have in the past. And the last decade has seen an increase in the number of 510Ks in which the FDA has required, actual patient data and follow-up before they'll submit. For products that are actual innovations, okay, so there's that word again, right? Be prepared to engage your clinical departments early to either set parameters for a preclinical trial or prepare your dance routine to explain why you don't need one. All right, this is a direct answer that you're going to need to questions that are absolutely going to be asked. All right, rule of thumb: if your engineers seem to be having a great time but periodically injure themselves in the lab, it's probably a traditional 510K. All right. You see an engineer and their hair is standing on end because they electrocuted themselves, that is a traditional 510K. Get ready. All right, that's the Super Bowl. All right, for class 2s anyway. Okay, who's affected by pre-market submissions? Basically everybody, right? Domestic manufacturers, spec developers, repackagers and relabelers, foreign manufacturers or exporters, right? Everybody is going to be affected by changes to pre-market submissions for 510K products. What you'll find, I think, is that your position as a regulatory affairs specialist is at the strategic portfolio planning table is going to increase. They are going to want to know from you where you think these submissions are going. Smart general managers and smart vice presidents, they're not just going to say, well, regulatory will take care of it. Now they're going to want you to actually come to the table, have done some preliminary work and say, well, I think that's a special, I think this is traditional, because those are going to change the value of these projects, right? So you're going to have a really, really important voice during the portfolio planning process that maybe some companies have not assigned in the past, right? So, again, that means that you're going to have to get into this, well, what do we have? Like, what kind of device, do I have? Well, special 510K, same intended use as a predicate, same technological characteristics as a predicate. And I should add it here, you're already manufacturing it, right? You already have 510K approval on that particular device, right? An abbreviated 510K, same intended use, but different technological characteristics, and does not raise questions of safety and efficacy. And the information submitted to the FDA demonstrates the device is safe and effective as a legally marketed device. Typically, it's non-clinical, right? So again, the FDA is giving you a guidance. You're following the guidance on how to prove that device is safe and effective. If that's the case, more than likely an abbreviated 510K. Traditional 510K could also include a reclassification of an existing product, same intended use as a predicate, substantially different technological characteristics as a predicate, and the information submitted to the FDA demonstrates the device is safe and effective. That typically will require some amount of preclinical or clinical data from patients, including follow-up. So I'm paying attention to the time here. Don't have a ton of time left, so I'm going to kind of burn through the rest of these slides. I'm going to give you an overview. So again, there's some guidance documents around this. How do you determine substantial equivalence? You've got, say, for instance, a mechanical device used for embryo dissection. The new device is an electrical device used for embryo dissection. The intended use is the same, but there are new questions of safety and effectiveness. So the new device is not substantially equivalent to the previous device, right? You are going to be submitting, you're more than, in this case, you're actually maybe up classified. You are in a situation where you're on that cusp of traditional 510K versus up classification. Determining intended use. You have a suturing device normally used for external closures. Your engineers want to change that and use that same device retrofitted to do internal closures. So the intended use is now different. More than likely, you're not going to be able to do an abbreviated 510K. You're going to have to do a traditional. You can lean on your existing data for your existing product line, but because it's going to be a new intended use, you're going to need to rely on a different data set. Modified intended use example. So this is a minimally invasive example. You have a surgical implant and implementation tool and method to repair cardiac tissue in an open procedure. You're going to want to change that toolkit so that you're allowed to do a minimally invasive procedure. The intended use is the same, but you're gonna just go through a smaller incision. But per the FDA, although on its face a minimally invasive procedure would appear to involve less serious risks than an open procedure, the minimally invasive procedure may be less effective or may present different but still serious risks. And this is another case that's pretty cuspy, right? May require an up classification, will absolutely require a traditional 510K, more than likely will require some kind of clinical data. So back in the day, that would not be the case, right? You could say, well, this was an open procedure, I'm now doing it minimally invasive. Great, 510K, off you go. You can do everything in the lab. No longer the case. Some additional guidance for companies were published along the same lines, along the same time as these classifications. Updated to refuse. They updated their refusal to accept guidelines. If you've noticed over the last couple of years, people are getting more and more of these refusal to accept notifications. They have clarified refusal to accept notifications where you are going to get an acceptance review completed within 15 days of receipt of submission. Okay, so before, I think even as recently as a couple of years ago, maybe even longer or shorter than that, your refusal to accept notice could come a month, could come 6 weeks after you submitted it. Now you're going to get that that acceptance review with that administrative assessment for completeness within the first 15 days of submission. Once you pass your administrative review or acceptance review, excuse me, you get into the substantive review. And that is a total of 90 working days before pauses and extensions for information requests, right? If the agency review deems a submission does not fall within the proposed acceptance criteria, they can refuse to accept. They can reject you outright, or they can give you guidance for resubmission. They have to do one or the other. And the resubmission time doesn't count against your 90-day review requirements. That's kind of I'm not sure how people should feel about that, but just so you know, as long as you're basically in the submission process and you're under administrative review assessment, you're not burning time on your 90-day clock. You can also use third-party review entities. That's something that has existed in the past, and the FDA is going to be leaning on further to further speed up their reviews. So real briefly, I actually see, again, this is why you can't trust R&D people, because I actually added slides overnight while I was watching election returns, because that's what we all do now, right? We watch election returns. So just really quick, this is going to impact portfolio evaluation. So it will impact more than likely the kinds of and the amounts of projects that companies are going to want to take on, because previously 510Ks were a relatively inexpensive way to enter the market. These kinds of changes to the 510K will also change the value of entering the market based on the kinds of products that you're proposing, right? So really simply, this is a basic portfolio valuation map, okay? On this side, you have the complexity or availability of enabling technology. Down here, not very complex, readily available enabling technology. Up here, super complicated, not available enabling technology. Down here, you have the change in value to the end user, right? So over here, end user really doesn't see it change, right? These are maybe their cost goes down, right? Over here, it's they're making this is an addition to their portfolio of options. Over here this is going to change the way they actually perform known surgeries or known procedures, and over here, this is going to require them to change their entire practice. Right, so that's kind of where we talk about, value versus technology. So a normally well-balanced product or a product portfolio is going to look something like this, right? You're going to have products or projects in each one of these categories because you want to kind of cover all your bases. The stuff down here in your sustaining projects are going to be typically letters to file, right? They're going to be things like, again, manufacturing change or cost savings, right? Up here in the upper corner, these are your disruptions. These are more than likely going to be PMAs. These are going to be products that no one's seen before, including the FDA. You're going to have to come in and prove yourself from scratch. And then historically, this is 510K world, right? This is everything else. This is our bread and butter. This is why we get paid. This is how we earn our living. It's this world right here. This is the everything from a new kind of suturing device to a new kind of infusion pump, all gets thrown into the 510K world, right? So that's why you typically have a lot of these kinds of projects in most medical device portfolios. And I don't think I quite hit 80%, but it's in the ballpark of 80% of projects. The changes are going to start looking like this, right? You actually might have fewer new platform programs because this is going to be a traditional 510K now, and traditional 510Ks, I believe, are going to become more expensive, more complicated to put out the door. Your existing line extensions, you're more than likely going to see similar, maybe a similar number, maybe slightly less. These are going to be your abbreviated 510K world, okay? And then down here, your sustaining projects are going to split between mostly letters to file over here, right? And then your special 510Ks over here, right? If you're going to release a new product to the end users, but your existing technology is pretty well established, you're more than likely going to be in that special 510K. Likewise, if you're changing, say, your labeling, your packaging, may not change the user, but you are going to actually do some updates to it, it falls in your special category, right? So this is understanding how portfolios break down by regulatory submission type is going to be extremely important for regulatory affairs specialists within medical device companies. You're going to play an absolutely critical role in companies understanding what their overall portfolio valuation is based on what they're trying to get out the door, right? It's actually very exciting, in my opinion. So as I suggested, the FDA is also talking about changing their post-market surveillance methodologies for Class 2 products, moving from a more passive surveillance paradigm to a more active surveillance paradigm, but through user and submission fees, right? So currently the industry reports adverse events, FDA audits those reports. This is going to change that, so the FDA is going to be getting real-time adverse event reports, and they're going to be updating their own. They're going to be doing their own surveillance and being more proactive in that regard. Pardon me, I'm talking for almost an hour. So again, CRNs, the role of CRNs to evaluate specific high-risk technology categories, that is going to increase. And so, you know, how is that going to look on post-market surveillance? You're going to see more experienced experts in these product categories serving as auxiliary arms of the FDA in their post-market surveillance activities, right? So, so it's kind of a good news, bad news, because you more than likely have relationships with individuals who are going to find themselves within CRNs, right? So they are going to know as much as you are. You're going to be speaking the same language, especially in these high-risk technology categories. That's actually going to be good for you because your barrier to understanding one another is going to go down. The other side of that coin is that the speed at which the FDA should be able to identify and manage post-market issues with these product categories should be increasing as well. Again, publicly available case for quality dashboard. I find this interesting. You know, this is going to be a tool for physicians and materials managers to research companies that call on them. So again, that's why we have a QRCOE and IPM, quality and regulatory. They need to work hand in hand. Because this is going to be part and parcel of the regulatory process. It's just what is your overall company's quality scoring over time on their case for quality dashboards. That's not up and running yet, but I think this is an interesting idea. It's actually pretty good. I do believe we'll see this. Maybe this may, again, this is maybe wild speculation, but again, engineers, what can you do? This more than likely, I think this will be one of the next things we see, at least if nothing else, the guidelines around this and public comment. I think this should be coming up relatively soon. And then update is rulemaking authority to streamline the process for upgrading product classifications, right? So this is a big deal. This is, I think, one of the biggest things for post-market surveillance that will impact all of us is that these high-risk categories, so let's take women's health as an example, right? Women's health historically back, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, before, you know, prior to the late 90s, certainly with the TBT sling of 1992 with Johnson & Johnson, because the techniques are relatively straightforward and the tools are relatively straightforward and the implants themselves weren't active implants, women's health products, specifically women's pelvic health products, were categorized in that not just 510K, but they're kind of the low to moderate risk, right? Like, you know, what could a mesh possibly do? It's not a big deal, it's just a mess. These are just trocars. What could they possibly do? In the hands of a skilled surgeon, you know, to worry about these things. We have since seen, and the total collapse of the female pelvic health industry as a result of class action lawsuits has demonstrated, is that this category of product was much higher risk than I think anybody fully understood. And so the combination of understanding that risk profiles will change based on the specific, not only the specific product category, but on the specific patient population, combined with the FDA's request to make up classification simpler, is going to lead to more traditional 510K products moving into that class 3 category. I mean, it's just going to happen. It's probably happening now. I don't have obviously we don't have visibility inside every company, but you're more than likely going to be having these kinds of conversations in a much more profound way moving forward. And then just this last bit, organizational restructuring. I'm not going to belabor this point because it really hasn't happened in earnest, and it may or may not be affecting folks. But really retooling CDRH to be product lifecycle groups is their ultimate goal, right? So you've got a single product type group. That product type group works together. They sit together in Rockville, Maryland, or wherever they are, and they are all sharing information. They're all learning at the same. Frankly, they are going to be they're going to match you knowledge for knowledge on total lifecycle management of your product line, right? So the good news for you, for industry, is that the people who review your pre-market submissions are the people who are going to review your post-market surveillance. Are the people who are going to review your ongoing quality and your ongoing audits, right? So you're not going to have to continually educate somebody new, right? These are people who are going to be focused on your product category. Just as a quick note, I had a reviewer once who was fresh out of his PhD in nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, and all of his questions on an orthopedic implant were around NMR. And we all said, okay, well, we don't really use NMR for orthopedic evaluation, but okay, this guy really knows NMR, so we're gonna apply that. I suspect that things like that, specific questions that may not be overly relevant to your specific product category, I think those will go down. I think highly specific questions from experts, those are going to go up. Okay, so guidance documents, like I said, for special abbreviated traditional 510Ks, as well as the refusal to accept guidance documents. Those were out. They were out as of the end of last year, so they're about a year old. More guidance documents have followed. So there's a guidance document on say skin contact materials for wearable products and some other things. But there haven't been any published timelines on the big ticket things for post-market surveillance or organizational structure changes. Again, my assumption is that COVID-19 has altered the plans for 2020. Things like organizational changes, you kind of need everybody in the same place at the same time to sort those out. Post-market surveillance too, I wonder if some of those guidances have been, if not put on hold, at least extended out because the rate of approvals have slowed in 2020. So it could be that, but I do expect that these changes to take place, as we kind of emerge from COVID and as time passes. Again, so what's next after this? So keep an eye on software as medical device guidelines. Primary areas of focus are going to be cybersecurity and networks, artificial intelligence, and machine learning enabled devices. As Class 2 products gain more active measures, right? You can enable more things through software, through machine learning, through network capability. You're doing more telemedicine. Telemedicine's it's very much the opposite of going away, as we can plainly see. That is going to require different product categories to enable more of that telemedicine. What is more than likely going to happen is that as software as a medical device gets more mature, the manner in which those enabling technologies will be regulated is going to change as well, right? Wearables, as I mentioned, there is guidance on materials around wearables, but again, as home health changes, as sort of patient care changes, as you want to move to more ambulatory surgical centers for patient care, home care, so on, wearables are going to become more prevalent. More than likely not wearable companies. I think more wearables are going to come through existing traditional medical device companies. And as a result, they're going to need to really pay attention to their regulatory paradigms for getting those things out the door. So I would expect wearable guidances. combined with this software as a medical device, right? So how do you keep a wearable secure within a patient's home? These kinds of things. I suspect that those will enter the marketplace as well. And with that, thank you all so much for your time. I think I'm just at about time, so I'm going to turn it over to questions, and I appreciate you paying attention. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. That was a very in-depth talk, and it generated some good questions that have been submitted that I think you'll enjoy having an opportunity to address for the audience. Okay,
Fun.
so your first question, and you may have already answered this because it came in pretty early. So please forgive the person, they say they're new to the medical device space, but they're looking at existing products that are already on the market, and they're comparing special 510K versus the abbreviated 510K pathways. And they're comparing existing marketed products versus a product that's very well defined, but newly marketed. So can you maybe, once again, go through the difference between, for an existing already on market product, whether, depending on how well defined it is, whether you qualify or should pursue the special pathway versus the abbreviated 510K pathway?
Sure. So remember, a special 510K, one of the tricks of a special 510K is that, are you currently marketing it yourself? Is your company currently manufacturing this product? And so that's step one. If you're currently manufacturing it, and then the changes you're making to it don't impact form, fit, or function, okay? So you're making, again, labeling changes, packaging changes, minor design modifications to improve maybe throughput, maybe quality, maybe cost. Maybe you're making a minor design change to I like using orthopedics because it's a really kind of chewy class 2 category of products. So you're an orthopedic company, you've got a bone screw that's made for wrists, and you're going to change that bone screw so you can use it for so for your finger knuckle bones, right? So it's a change, but you're already making it, and that change is pretty minor. Special 510K, okay? An abbreviated 510K is what I think you're referring to, is that there is an existing marketplace of these products. You yourself or your company, you're not in that market space yet, but there is an existing market of these products, right? So you're gonna enter that market space, and you're gonna compete against the people who are already there. In doing so, you're going to adhere to their existing set of standards on how do you write, everything from how do you write requirements to how do you test to how do you market, how do you get this thing out the door, right? If you're doing that, that is an abbreviated 510K. Okay, so you're a new market entrant, but the market is mature. There's already stuff on the market. You or your engineers, you can go buy competitors' products, and you can look at them and you can say, okay, well, how do they do this? Let's do this. Okay, if you can start doing that, abbreviated 510K. If there's nothing on the market, all right, or if the market is super weird, or if it's identified as a high risk marketplace, right? Infusion pumps is a great example of this, right? Infusion pumps are actually like elastomeric infusion pumps. They're like water balloons with a straw, okay? There's nothing to them. But because of what they're doing, they're delivering chemotherapy, or they're delivering, non-narcotic pain medication. They're delivering very specific antibiotics, right? The risk to the patient is not small. So the complexity of the product is relatively low, but the risk is relatively high. That is going to kick you into a traditional 510K, right? You've got that high risk, maybe low technological complexity, but you've got to make sure that you're getting this thing out the market. And the manner in which you test that is maybe not well defined, right? So you've got a couple different pump companies. They have submitted their own test methodologies. More than likely, the design that you have is going to have specific test methods you're going to need to develop yourself and validate yourself. That's traditional 510K.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the examples help for sure. And just as a reminder, we go until for another 20 minutes about, so feel free to add more questions in the chat box, but we do have several more that have come in that I think you'll enjoy answering, Chris. So this one is it spins off what you were just talking about from an abbreviated 510K. And you also mentioned about categorization, new categorization of medical devices. So how does someone who maybe is tracking med device in the area of wound care, how would they find out early information on whether an abbreviated 510K they would qualify for? So how do you keep track of these trends, these differences of categorization, and when potentially you might qualify for abbreviated 510K? How do you hear about that?
We'll definitely be a RAPS member. So that's definitely going to help, just because look, this stuff is, historically, the FDA has not been great about publishing or sort of generating these kinds of regulatory trends, right? So they publish guidance documents, are super useful. They publish, they're actually quite good at when they sort of open up their thinking to the public and say, look, we're thinking, like, this is a great, actually, all this stuff's a great example of it. They said back in 2017 or 18, they said, look, we're thinking about, we feel like the class 2 system needs to change, the 510K system needs to change. Here's what we're thinking. We would love to hear from you. Pay attention to the FDA when they start telling you that their beliefs are changing. Get involved in the public discussion, because all that stuff, when I say public discussion, I mean that stuff is public. I mean, you can go online and read through comments from your peers saying, I think this, I think that. The FDA reads that stuff. That's actually, they not only read to it, they will always have a response, right? So I think public discussion on 510K for pre-market submission changes closed in like March or April of 2019. Then there was a response. So the FDA then responded to the public commentary in the summer of that year. And then the first guidance documents came out at the end of that year, right? So being part of that, getting yourself involved, staying on the FDA website, making sure that you're part of that is is critical. Being part of communities like this, also super critical. There are more than likely, not more than likely, but they're absolutely 100% true. There are specific industry groups within your medical device modality, right? If you're an orthopedic person, there are tons of orthopedic engineering, biomedical engineering, and regulatory affairs groups for orthopedics, infusion pumps, women's health, blah, blah, blah. All these things are absolutely out there. Go to, find them in your area, go to the conferences. Everything's online now, right? So go to the online conferences, get on your Zoom or your GoTo and go to these things. The information's out there, but it's just not, it's not well collated, okay? So you're gonna have to start to reach out to your community. But yeah, RAPS is a great place to start. RAPS, and I would even, jump on LinkedIn and just do a search of people in your world that are in your industry, are also regulatory folks, and just see kind of what they're seeing. No one's going to tell you how they, maybe not no one, but most people won't tell you their specific example, but everyone will tell you, everyone miraculously knows how the guy down the street did, right? So I can't tell you how our submission went, but I happen to know that the person on the street, this is how their submission went, and blah, blah, blah. So it's like the same thing, like asking for a friend.
Okay. Good. This next question, you mentioned up classification, and I know in the past, we were trending towards down classification for medical devices. Now it looks like we're trending to up classification. Can you speak to the timing of when a medical device could potentially be up classified? And if you're in the middle of a review cycle with FDA and the product gets up classified, does that impact you? And do you have any examples?
So timing on up classification really could happen at any time. So I would be, this is where pre-submission conferences with the FDA are actually going to be in your benefit. There's a lot of argument within the industry on the relative value of those pre-submission conference calls. I am in favor of them. So I'll give you my bias. I think, and look, by the way, I actually worked at the FDA for a little while. So it was precisely 1 million years ago, but they're not bad people, okay? They're trying to do a job, and they want you to be successful. So, go into a pre-submission call with the FDA well prepared. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we believe. Here's why we believe it, okay? And this is what we're going to do. This is what we proposed. Do you agree? Don't go into a pre-submission call saying, this is what we want to do. How do you think we should get this thing approved? Because they're always going to tell you, you know, do the maximal thing, right? But if you have good data, if you have good preclinical evidence, or if you have good experience in the field, or you know, kind of however you're pulling your case together, absolutely, you know, bring that to the table and ask them to give you some kind of commentary, guidance, you know, so on that. But to answer your question, I guess more specifically, upclassification can happen at any time. You can, in the middle of a review, it is entirely possible that information comes out that causes the FDA to upclassify your product. Now, in the event that they do that, they will kick your review back. They will kick your submission back, excuse me. They will halt your review, kick your submission back, and say, okay, you, based on the evidence that A, you've submitted, B, we've taken from the field, C, we have seen from one of your, by the way, your competitors are submitting 510Ks as well. So, you know, if they come out the door and they have used a more rigorous test methodology than you have, guess what? That affects you. So you better have a very good story to tell. But if those things will impact the FDA's thinking and they can upclassify you, what will happen is that they will basically, your submission is canceled at that point. I mean, they'll give you I guess there's two things, depends on how aggressive you want to be. More than likely, they will give you an opportunity to respond. They'll give you as much time as you want to respond. They will say, okay, you know, you want to come back and keep this as a traditional 510K, that's fine. Here are the questions that you need, right? Everyone's seen those, right? Nope, I want clarifying questions. At this point, however, if the FDA is actually telling you you're more than likely going to be upclassified, discretion is the better part of valor. I would retract my submission and I would reevaluate that program in the context of the new classification. I don't think, look guys, the FDA takes this very, very seriously. And that slide that I put up earlier on all the headlines, like nobody wants those headlines. You don't want those headlines. The feds don't want those headlines. Nobody wants those headlines. Nobody in industry wants those headlines. So they are going to be, especially on those categories of products that have been identified as high risk, they are going to be very, very, they're going to be very precise in what they want from you. And if they tell you you're now a class 3, hey, congratulations, you're a class 3 company now. You know, that's going to be that's a very tough thing to argue against.
Okay. Good. The next person noticed that there wasn't a lot of discussion about de novo devices, where in the de novo pathway, there's no predicate that exists. Can you maybe compare how to go about pursuing approval for a de novo device and how it compares to a traditional 510K?
Yeah, so de novo, that's a good question. So if no existing product exists, I mean, if there is no predicate whatsoever for your particular device, you're going to be relying on the marketplace, right? You're going to be relying on physicians in the marketplace who are currently doing work that solves whatever the patient problem is that your device purports to solve. De novo devices become real. I mean, that's how I built my career, man. I love de novo devices. That's why I used to get up in the morning, is for those things.
That's when your engineers are jumping up and down.
That's when your engineers are jumping. That's when your engineers are getting to work early and they're staying late for de novo devices. Those are fun. Here's what I can tell you a couple things. This is probably not going to be a super satisfying answer because there isn't a complete answer to this question. There just isn't. It's because it's going to depend on any number of things. First, what category of product are you in, right? The FDA is 100% telling you over and over and over again, we are establishing categories of products as high risk. I don't care if they're a class 2 product historically. I don't care what someone did before. I am telling you that infusion pumps and vascular devices and women's pelvic health products and a couple of other things are high risk. So if you're going to go out the door with a de novo product in an established high risk category, you can expect you're going to be on the knife's edge of a PMA or a traditional 510K with clinical evidence and follow-up required. That's, you know, it's a pretty fine line. I mean, it really is, and you're not going to know until you get there, especially if there is no other product. So that's where you need to do, as a regulatory affairs person with your team, you need to really do a lot of homework. And what is that homework? The homework is, make sure your requirements are very, very clear and they're validated. Make sure your test methodologies are super clear and they're validated. Make sure you have, you're going to want key opinion leaders advising you in that product development space, because they're going to need advocates who are going to, have to ride shotgun on your risk management and on your testing. And ideally, I came from a company, I was at companies that actually did a lot of de novo devices that were high risk products, and we had our physician advisors signing off on our risk management plans, right? So and our FMEAs and our test method validation. So we had to bring in a wider ancillary team to prove to the FDA that no, we've used the right people to evaluate this program in advance of going out the door, in advance of our submission. Please don't make us do additional clinical trial. But frankly, the FDA is just getting more aggressive about that. So what kind of product, are you in a high risk product category? There's no ambiguity about that. Either you're building an infusion pump or you're not, right? And you know what that is. If it's it's a de novo product in a high risk category, get ready for clinical evidence requirements. Just get ready for it, right? Understand what that's going to need. Understand what your costs are going to be associated with that. They're a hell of a lot more expensive than they used to be, right? Put that all into your project plan. If you submit and you've done all of this preclinical work in your own lab and the FDA says, oh, well, guess what? No, you don't need that clinical evidence. Hey, throw a party. It's great. But I would absolutely assume that de novo products are going to undergo additional scrutiny, and certainly if they're in certain product categories, they'll undergo even more scrutiny than that. Now, just back up for a moment. Let's say you're in a de novo product. You're not in what is identified as a high-risk category. Now look at the enabling technology for that de novo product, right? Is that existing technology? Is that currently on the market? Is it really just, a 300 class series stainless steel and high molecular weight polyethylene and parylene coating and and some fancy techniques with your physicians? You're probably okay. It's probably still a traditional 510K, but you're more than likely not going to have to go into patients before your submission. But if it's, again, the example I used earlier from my own life, if it's, an artificial intelligence or a machine learning enabled platform that connects to an imaging system that's already on the market that helps physicians in perioperative surgeries, guess what? That technology is not readily available. You're inventing something pretty substantial, right? Once again, you're in that gray area between traditional 510K and possible class 3. Now, in that particular case, it was a traditional 510K with clinical evidence required. So it was a lower clinical bar, but we still had to meet it. That's not a very satisfying answer. I apologize, but you're in the most fun and the most complicated part of medical device submissions.
Yeah, and you're speaking from your own experience.
I am speaking from my own experience, exactly.
Okay, so building on the clinical evidence required, there's also a trend towards FDA potentially acknowledging the type of real-world data, real-world evidence. Do you think that can you think of examples of real-world data and real-world evidence that could be used to support a traditional 510K submission in addition to or potentially in place of clinical data?
Sure. Well, I mean, look, if it's a hell of a lot easier if you are already a manufacturer in the market space. So if you are building, go back to, I think I'm able to do this. Hold on a second. Let's see, hold on just one sec. I'm going to see if I can cheat just a little bit and use a visual aid. All right, can I see that?
Yes.
Okay, so all right, so take a look at this. So this is your product portfolio, right? What you're referring to are these sort of new platforms in the traditional 510K world, right? So You're not up here, you're not disrupting technology, you're not down here, you're not kind of just churning out stuff that's, kind of lightweight work. You're in this mode. I would say first, if you already have an established history in that product space, okay? So if you are a company who's building a new platform in a space where you already exist, that gives you a leg up because you already have proven that you as an organization know kind of what you are doing in this market space. And you can more than likely take your internally gathered quality data on your own sort of previous generations of platforms, and you can leverage that relatively well against your new platform. Okay, so that's kind of the layup, right? If you're already there, even if you're in a high risk product category, right? Let's say you're an infusion pump manufacturer and you're going to go from generation 1 of your infusion pump to generation 2 of your infusion pump. Generation 1 infusion pump data is relevant, okay? It absolutely is important. And if you've been collecting it and you've been working with your physicians over however many years that product's been on the market, that is all really, really good, juicy evidence that should have, it helps you validate your requirements, helps you validate your test methodologies, and helps you make the safety and efficacy case for your traditional 510K on your new platform, okay? Even if your platform is substantially different from a design standpoint than your previous platform, right? Now, let's say you are a new market entrant, okay? If you're a new market entrant, that is going to be more challenging, and that's where you're in the situation where, a new market entrant for a traditional 510K is going to be more difficult than it has been in the past, because if you can't rely on any of your own history to demonstrate that you as an organization know how to operate in this space at that level, they are more than likely going to ask for at least some kind of preclinical evidence for you. Now, I don't want you to jump off a bridge. So what you can do, and what has worked in the past, is you find yourself some key opinion leaders, some physician key opinion leaders who are using existing products in the marketplace, okay? More than likely they will have published on those products, especially if they are true KOLs, okay? If they've already published peer-reviewed articles on the existing marketplace, on existing products in that marketplace, and more than likely exist, they're out there in the world, that could serve as a useful, I don't want to use the word predicate because predicate that's a legal term, but that could serve as a useful platform for you to make your case for your traditional 510K. It will be tricky though, okay? So again, category of product, high risk category of products, the bar is gonna be much, much higher. Enabling technology, what's already out there, okay? So yes, you can submit data that already exists for your new traditional 510K. I don't have super rosy information, however, to give you on that, because again, just the FDA's attitude on this is changing. I mean, if you asked me that 3 years ago, I would have said, yeah, absolutely. Like, go find whatever competitor in whatever country they're operating in, go, pull the quality data from them and go submit that and say, look, ours is better, fight me. But you can't do that anymore, right? So it's just a different world.
Okay, I'm going to change tactics, and after I answer this question or ask this question, then I'm going to ask the free ebook question. So those of you still on the line, get prepared to do a quick answer in the question and answer box.
Ooh.
So, but for this question, we're talking about the post-market surveillance trends, and there appears, according to this questioner, a new paradigm for post-market surveillance that he believes supports large device firms over small startups. So the question is, what can a small firm do to minimize the increased cost?
Oh.
That's for last.
Boy, that is the best. That's a good question. What can a small firm do to manage the increased cost
of post-market surveillance?
Of post-market surveillance? Okay, so I'm going to give you my my entrepreneur answer first, and then I'm going to give you my nice, well-tailored collar shirt guy answer afterwards. Okay, my entrepreneur answer first is that get on the market and generate revenue. That's how you do it, right? So if you have, again, once upon a time, what you could do as a small, and I did startups, right? I did a few startups that no one's ever heard of, and I've got a decent track record. 2 out of 3, exited successfully. Once upon a time, what you could do is you could launch one product, right? One class 2 product that was in a marketplace that had, some real juice, some real energy. You could get out the door and you could generate plenty of revenue to fund, if not your own organization, certainly fund a bridge to get to a Series B or a Series C. Okay, so getting on the board, getting revenue, demonstrating that you've got, some real horsepower under the hood. There you go. That's your answer, right? Now, what you'd have to do in order to do that, I'm not saying that's not the right answer. I'm saying your strategy needs to change. You need to have a portfolio, right? So it can't just be one traditional 510K that you're basically sitting on, while you have to wait. You're going to need to do some other things. You're going to need a couple of lines. You're going to need a couple of Me Too's. Quick hits, call them base hits, right? But you got to generate revenue. As a small company, I know, whoever asked this question and wants to reach in the screen and strangle me because I'm telling you exactly what you already know. But that's the way I view it, right? It's hard to innovate your way out of debt, right? You gotta generate some dough. The collared shirt guy answer is that you need to be much more small companies need to be much more deliberate. And let me just back up. I actually think that part of the impetus for changing class 2 products is because of some of the gray area that's been in small companies in the medical device world over the last 20 years. Okay, not going to name any names, but there's been some shenanigans, right? What I think is that small companies just need to be very, very deliberate and very, very clean getting through their product development. That means you need a champion, you need a key opinion leader, you need to establish your quality and regulatory criteria early on. This whole thing about flying by the seat of your pants, building the plane while, designing the plane while you fly it, or whatever the hell the statement is. That's part of being a small company in the medical device field, but it's no longer only the only part of being a small company in the medical device field. These costs it's just going to be higher. It's just going to be more expensive to get a traditional 510K out the door, especially if you have innovative technology or innovative solution, or it's a de novo program, or if you're in a blue sky space. Okay, so all of those things, they are just going to add to your cost. Your P&Ls are just going to change. Just be very, very honest about that, and make sure your investors are experienced med device investors and not someone from an industry who doesn't fully understand that. You're going to need to change your partnership. And I'm kind of getting into the more business side of things. But look, it's tough. It's just going to be tough. It's just going to be tougher. And I don't have an easy answer for you. I apologize.
That's okay. Thanks, Chris, for not only sharing your experiences, but also fielding some of these tough questions. So now for an easy question for the audience. And the first person who types in the correct answer in the question and answer box will win a free ebook from RAPS. So the question is, what are the names of the 3 most common types of 510K pathways? And the first person who answered was Jeffrey Friedman, but we're getting lots of correct answers. But Jeffrey Friedman, RAPS will reach out to you with the free ebook code. Congratulations.
Thank you, Chris, for this presentation. Thank you, Susan, and the RAPS San Francisco Bay Area chapter for putting this program together. The completion code is on the screen. Again, you will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with the code. If you have any other questions, please contact RAPS customer service at 1-301-770-2920 extension 200 or via email at support@raps.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we will appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay positive, and have a great rest of your day.